Welcome back to Football Weather. Galen, Clavio, Matt Blaszka joining you as we are in the middle of November. We're actually past the halfway point of November. We are fully into football weather season. And Matt, we got some wrenches thrown into the machinery this weekend, at least a couple of them. And we're going to have some fascinating things to talk about in relation to the results this past week. And then as we look ahead to next week, kind of that last week before we get into rivalry week. This is when things really heat up. We're right on the precipice of the playoff rankings really mattering. I'm excited. It's good to see you again. How you doing?
Always a pleasure. Yeah, excited. It's someone said the other day, every November win's a good win at this point as you just try to barrel towards, bowl eligibility for some teams. Obviously, we'll focus a lot on the playoff here and what happened this weekend. But we're starting to see that it's starting to take shape a little bit. But we have some really interesting games coming up, which we'll talk about later. But some interesting results that I think affect quite a few teams here for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we were waiting for the first unexpected, shoe to drop, and we got it in Tuscaloosa this weekend. So we're going to talk about that game. We're going to talk about the other SEC games because there were some that were a little back and forth, and I think we might have had our first elimination of the contending teams, one of the contending teams in particular this week. So a lot to talk about on that front. But first, just a reminder, folks, we're brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashion, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. I am wearing my USC Trojans hoodie out of celebration for them, I think, officially joining the Big Ten by knocking off Iowa in a game in the rain. I think that is essentially the hazing that all Big Ten teams have to go through before they're actually officially members. So congrats, USC. It was an accomplishment for you, albeit in your home stadium. We'll see you do it in Kinnick at some point. But
Right.
Homefield Apparel, you can find all of your college football outfitting needs and more. They just dropped the Game Breaker jackets, which are going to come in handy even more as we head into football weather here this last half of the season. And, of course, a full stock of hoodies, crew necks, long sleeve tees, whatever you need for your apparel desires. You can go over to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, and get 15% off your first order. Again, Homefield Apparel, proud sponsor of Football Weather and the Back Home Network. Also, folks, just a reminder, and you heard me talk about this if you listened over on Crimson Cast, but we are currently working through Homefield with Abbott on the We Give Blood 2025 drive. Every 2 seconds, someone in our country needs blood. When you donate through Abbott and the We Give Blood drive competition, you're not just helping your school compete to win, you're also helping to save millions of lives and helping to contribute to a chance for your campus to win $1 million for student or community health. Plus, you'll score a limited edition Homefield t-shirt. So head over to your conference's website. You should be able to go, for instance, in the Big Ten, it's big10.org/Abbott. Find a donation location. Not only can you donate blood in the name of your school, but you can become eligible for a specialized t-shirt that indicates your school is helping in this fight to donate blood. So again, the Abbott We Give Blood 2025 drive, go check it out and try to help out, especially in this holiday season, certainly a time of need as far as blood donations are concerned. We thank you all for your support on that front. All right, Matt, let's go ahead and dive into things as we recap this past week in college football. Let's start in the SEC because that was where most of the really big results occurred. And we got to start in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Oklahoma 23, number 4, Alabama 21. Oklahoma came in 11th, and this was a team, obviously, that we thought might have had the juice, but, into this game so far this season, they'd beaten Michigan at home, and they'd won a tight game last week at Tennessee, but they lost to Texas, and they lost to Ole Miss on their home field. So there were some questions about whether they could really go into Tuscaloosa and break the nation's longest home winning streak, but they did. And they did it through great defense. Like, this was a game where the offense for both teams just really struggled, but Oklahoma was able to turn that defense into offense, and Ty Simpson just not able to get the job done, especially in those closing drives. Alabama shut out in the fourth quarter in their home stadium. This was a surprise, but maybe not an overwhelming surprise, since I got to give Bill Connolly an S&P Plus credit. They had this as a 1-point game. The statistics were showing this could have gone either way, and Alabama not quite as overwhelming as we were led to believe.
If you just looked at the box score and you saw the box score, you saw Alabama 406 yards, Oklahoma 212, being outgained by 200 yards. You would not think this would be a very close game. And I also saw another stat: Oklahoma's longest drive was 45 yards, I think, all day. Well, again, every statistical measure you would look at when it came to actually looking at this game, it would favor Alabama. But Oklahoma went in there like you said, they played really good defense. I was really impressed with Messier's confidence. He didn't have an overwhelmingly statistically great game, but he controlled the game when he was in there. And it was a must-win for them. Like you said, it was an elimination game, but it was for Oklahoma. If they lost, they would really be in trouble. They still have LSU and Missouri left, maybe, I think.
Yeah, Mizzou next week, and then LSU in the final game.
LSU. Yeah. So a must-win to get to 10 wins and really put themselves in. And certainly now you could argue maybe the biggest road win of the year, right up there with the game Indiana won at Oregon. So certainly changes the perspective of both teams, because it doesn't put Oklahoma in any really near the SEC championship game, but it now potentially knocks Alabama out, which maybe not the worst thing in the world to be knocked out of that game, right?
Yeah.
But certainly changes the paradigm of what we were thinking about Alabama, and now this home loss, and now if I'm curious, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the committee rankings, how that Florida State win or loss, affects their seed as now they're going to drop quite a bit, you would think.
We kept asking, is Alabama ever actually going to get penalized for losing to Florida State? It just felt like people were of the collective opinion, oh, that game didn't matter, which is wild, because I don't know that there's another school in college football that you would be giving that level of latitude to. But now, it's part of the resume. They lost to Florida State, and many teams did not lose to Florida State throughout the course of this year. I'll say this. It's interesting because Alabama didn't get knocked out of the SEC title game with this loss. You look at the tiebreakers, and if they lose a second time, they'd get knocked out. But right now, they hold the tiebreaker over Georgia head-to-head.
Mm-hmm.
And even in a three-way tie, they've played such a good schedule in the SEC that in a three-way tie between, for instance, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama, it would still be Alabama making the SEC title game.
Yep.
And you got to think, if they make the SEC title game as a 2-loss team, even if they lose that game, they would still be okay for the playoff. They're probably the only team that you could look at and say, oh, if you have 3 losses at the end of the season, you're probably still getting in. But it really did reveal some concerns for Alabama as they start to get into this tougher competition that can defend well, to only rush for 2.4 yards per carry in this game. And even if you add back the sack yardage, they only rushed for 89 yards in this game. That's just not going to get the job done. And that's been the knock on Alabama all year, is that their rushing attack just isn't going to be sufficient. So this is where it's going to be interesting. Your point's well taken on Oklahoma. They look like they're in really good shape. If they finish 10-2 and 6-2 in the conference, they now have a win against Alabama, and they've got a win against Michigan. Both of those teams are in the hunt as well, and that will resonate with the committee.
Yeah, and you look at what Oklahoma did. I mean, they had a really challenging schedule, an upper tier SEC schedule, and they have the Michigan win as Michigan continues to creep. And as we start seeing this logjam of 10-win teams, it's only going to help Oklahoma having some of those head-to-heads. Now, I know we didn't see that with the case of Miami Notre Dame yet, but I assume this one would take a little bit more precedent because of Oklahoma has more quality wins right now. I know we're going down maybe a little bit of a tangent, but certainly as this is all kind of circling together, that 10-win mark is where you want to be. And we're starting to see a bigger glut that I think we thought maybe even last week.
Yeah.
That may exist, that there may be 13 teams in this mix now that actually can win 10 games. And then we're going to have some real conversations of parsing those out, right? Because last week I think we both talked about the Big 12 being out, and now BYU is creeping back in because of this Alabama. So this was the biggest win of the year this late in the season. Like I said on our open, November wins are important, and certainly Oklahoma needed this November win to stay relevant. And certainly Venables, we talked a little bit about it, probably not in trouble, but certainly was being talked about potentially being in trouble if they got to like an 8-4. Now it seems like at worst they're going to be 9-3. So anyway, Oklahoma's now building on this. I would expect Oklahoma to likely finish 10-2, but again, now we're in our hardest month of the year to try to win these games. So it'll be curious to see how they play these next 2 games.
Switching to a team that cannot win 10 games after what happened on Saturday, Texas goes into Athens and gets spanked in the fourth quarter. Georgia 35, Texas 10. It drops Texas to 7-3 and essentially eliminates them from playoff contention, although doesn't eliminate them as a playoff spoiler. This was a game where we'd seen Texas beat Oklahoma. Texas had beaten Vanderbilt. It's like, okay, maybe they've gotten it turned around. That was the narrative coming into the game. And then their offense just got shut down by Georgia in this game. Arch Manning had a decent game, but man, Texas rushed 17 times for 23 yards in this game. They could not get anything done. Meanwhile, Georgia, very balanced attack, both through the air. Gunnar Stockton with 4 touchdown passes. They look like they're in stride. And Georgia's in a fascinating spot right now because, as I mentioned earlier, they probably can't get to the SEC title game unless Alabama loses a second time. They don't want to get to the SEC title game. Georgia would love nothing more than to finish the season 11-1 with a win against Georgia Tech and not have to worry about playing again until either Athens or, at this point, perhaps more likely, whatever the bye that they get into the Sugar Bowl or the Cotton Bowl is to start their playoff run. This was a really impressive win by Georgia, and it pretty much put a stake in the heart of Texas.
Yeah, so let me start with Georgia here. We talked about this last week, how they blew up Mississippi State. We're like, that's not a great win. Mississippi State certainly bottom of the barrel, even though they were giving a lot of teams a hard time. But this was what we've been waiting for from Georgia all year, to finally step up and be not the Georgia that was from 21-22, but certainly a really good team on both sides of the ball. They dominated this game. The onside kick by Kirby to really put this game out of reach was a really great call by Kirby. That made it. They scored in that position to make it 28-10. So we said last week that if Texas lost this game, they still would have a chance. I don't think they do. I don't think a win even at Texas A&M would even matter at this point. 9-3. A blowout loss at Georgia where they really weren't in the game. They didn't look that great. I really think Texas is probably done. I don't want to write the obituary on that yet, but I think they're done at this point. And it's really, now we're looking at 3 of the top 5 teams preseason ranked will not be in the playoff. Penn State, Clemson, and now Texas. I think they're all in the top 4 actually, which is amazing to see how this sport is balanced out. And that's a longer conversation for another day. But Texas is done, and it's really interesting. Really curious at how this plays out for them, even at A&M in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the top 4 was Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, and Clemson. And and it's actually, it's funny because if you expand it out to the top 10, 5 of those teams are probably not making it into the playoff because LSU was 9th and Miami was 10th. And it is an uphill battle for both. Well, LSU's
out. Yeah.
Miami's got a mountain that they can't climb by themselves, and it's pretty fascinating that things have worked out the way that they have on that front. One thing I will say, I feel like I'm not contractually obligated to note this, but I just want everybody to be a little cautious about the following. Georgia looked great in this game against Texas. It's possible that's just because Texas isn't that great. That we always, and I heard this on every podcast that I listened to, people saw what Georgia did to Texas, and they said, Georgia's in full form. I think it was, the On3 podcast was like, well, if Ohio State doesn't win the national title, Georgia's the other team that can do it. I was like, guys, let's pump the brakes, all right? This Texas team may just not be as good as you thought they were, and it's fine, but you've got to stop investing in the narrative immediately when you see a game like this in November that suddenly a team in the SEC's got it figured out and is going all the way. And I'd say the same thing about Oklahoma. Oklahoma beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That may just be because Alabama's a better than average team, but they're not like a national champion contender. I just think that we're still dealing with people not being able to reset their expectations when it comes to these SEC teams, because both of those teams, if you look at the power rankings, they're in that 10 to 15 range. They're not much higher than that when I look at like FPI efficiencies and things like that. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, no, it's fair. And I think we've been waiting for this all year, at least for Georgia to blow somebody out in Sanford Stadium. They really haven't done it. I mean, they beat Kentucky pretty big, by 21, but to actually take the screws to maybe, a team up against the wall here in Texas was something we've been waiting for.
Oh, I
You're
agree
right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we'll see more here in 2 weeks, with Tech. And honestly, we may not see them for really a month and a half, depending how the tiebreakers will work out, because the tiebreakers, like you said, don't really favor Georgia much at all. And they're likely, if they win the next two, they're going to be the 4 seed. I would think. I don't know how it breaks differently for them at the top.
Ole Miss and Florida. This was such a weird game. Ole Miss wins 34-24. Looked like they were in a deep freeze most of the game, had to score 2 touchdowns in the final quarter to come up with the margin of victory. And, I mean, it was a good win for Ole Miss. Florida's not a good team, but, you have these games where you struggle, like you said, in November. But that wasn't the story that came out of this game. The story was this weirdness, this awkwardness around Lane Kiffin, who will not come out and say that he's going to stay at Ole Miss. He hasn't signed the contract extension, and yet I think a lot of people were expecting some kind of news today that Lane Kiffin was going to be leaving for Florida. That didn't happen either. It's created this weird thing around Ole Miss. It's not going to matter because, again, this is a team that they've got to buy, and then they've got the Egg Bowl against a Mississippi State team that's likely going to be overmatched. But we've talked a lot, Matt, about this whole idea of what happens when a coach is faced with the possibility of leaving a playoff contender.
Yeah.
This might be our test case here because I'm not sure what Ole Miss would do if Kiffin does leap. It certainly doesn't sound like he's committed to staying at this point, but I also don't know that we'll hear any definitive news on this for a while. It's just a very strange situation to be closing out their regular season with.
And so I've been thinking about this too. He's been there for, I don't know, 6 years-ish, I think. Yeah. So it's not like he's coming here, built it for 2 years, and he's looking at the next job. I mean, he's built this team for what he's wanted for as long as he's wanted. It's the third 10-win season for Ole Miss under his watch. It's never happened before. It's going to be curious what Ole Miss decides to do, right? Like, are they going to be like, hey, we need to know, I guess, right? At some point, because all these, it's not a very strong pool of candidates out there unless you're really going to go off the board. And there's a chance their next game after the Egg Bowl could be January 1. I mean, outside chance. But I think both of us don't think that will happen, but there's an outside chance, or it's at least late December. So I'm curious to see how it plays out. Lane Kiffin's never been a guy to shy away from it being about him, if you will. So
right, yeah.
But if I'm Ole Miss, you're probably thinking, can we get an answer this week or next week, and we can decide what you're going to do, coach this team, not coach this team. It's interesting because you didn't think this would happen in a 12-team playoff, but the way the calendar sets up, there's no other way they have to do it because a lot of times we already have all these coaches already fired. A lot of times you'll see coaches get fired next week before the last game of the season so they can start because the following Tuesday or Wednesday, I think, is the opening of the portal, or not the portal, is a National Signing Day. So the calendar is really, we're 2 weeks out from that. We're not that far from that point. So it's a really big predicament for both Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin here.
Yeah. Other game in the SEC worth noting, and this was the one that they started the day off with, Texas A&M 31, South Carolina 30. Texas A&M has to come back from down 27. They become the first SEC team in history to do that. They scored 28 points in the second half. This is a game that I don't know that anybody can get a narrative read on. I mean, do you punish Texas A&M for playing so badly in the first half? And they did look awful. But then you also have to give them credit for playing so well in the second half. Indiana got killed in some circles for struggling on the road against a team chock full of 4 and 5 stars in Penn State that's had a rough season. I don't know what you do with A&M, although as we saw in the polls, they didn't really drop, as neither did Indiana in the polls. I think that's important to note. But a lot of people looked at this game and especially that first half and said, well, wait, should we not take Texas A&M seriously about anything now? They deserve credit for coming back, but it's a weird wrench to throw in the overall image of A&M, which was this kind of very stable, kind of not overly flashy, but very, very procedurally focused team that wasn't having games like this. And this is definitely some new information we need to take into account, especially since it was at home.
Yes, this was the most surprising, not result because they ended up winning the game, but to beat Browns by 27 to a zombie South Carolina team that has pretty much been dead for a month now was really bad. But let me just, I'm just going to read a quote, and this was a quote from who was over announcing was the game. This is the mark of a championship team. Okay, that's fine. How about Alabama, who beat this team two weeks ago, 29-22? Is that a mark of a championship team? How about Indiana? Last week got killed for beating Penn State by 3. Same Penn State's in the same exact ilk and maybe of recruiting as South Carolina probably has some athletes. I think we need to start really stop this narrative every time someone has a bad game. Like they have been very good, Texas A&M, so I'm not taking that away from them. But if we're gonna be fair to A&M, we have to be fair to Indiana and Alabama and all these teams that have these close games against poor teams. It happens. You're not going to win every game by 50 points. With that said, this had my intent up in the first half. I was not sure that they would come back. I don't think anybody did. It makes it really interesting to see what happens with A&M now because they have played, and everyone's now seen the graphic. They have literally played 7 of all 7 teams in the lower half of the standings.
Yeah.
In the SEC, they will play their first real game in the, I guess, Texas. What are they? 7th now, so right. They're not even going to play anybody in the top 6 at this point. So, yes, they have been gifted the schedule, and that happens. It's going to happen more and more in these super conferences. As we know, we were here last year in Indiana. It helped out Indiana for sure last year. And A&M is very good. I'm really curious to see, if what happens now with Georgia and A&M, as Georgia now has these bigger wins, and so does Oklahoma. If things start to go south, if they do lose this game, what happens to A&M?
It's really interesting because A&M losing their last 2 games, if they lost to Texas and then lost in the SEC championship game, you'd be looking at a resume, the highlights of which would be a 1-point win against Notre Dame and a 21-point win at a Missouri team that was missing its starting quarterback. And that would be it. That would literally be it in terms of anything impressive. Now, is that enough to get in? Probably. I think you would look at that and you would say, how would you compare them to Alabama? With Alabama having the number of wins that they've got on their resume, but a worse loss than any of the losses that A&M would have. Again, I'll take this and I'll go back to what I said about Georgia versus Texas, which is, there's not invincible teams in the SEC. And I think the narrative issues with SEC teams are largely revolving around the issue that when you see games like this, people have it in their heads for whatever reason. Texas A&M came back and won against South Carolina, still thinking South Carolina is the overhyped South Carolina team from the beginning of the year or from the end of last year, not the team that has been leaking oil for the entire season, essentially. I think
they're 1-7 with the win against Kentucky in the conference. They haven't. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's the point is well taken, and so I just, again, you could see SEC teams sweeping everything and getting into the Final Four. It's very possible. It's also possible none of them could make it there. I just don't know that the conference is deserving of the narrative gifts that they've been given, and I just think it's a recalibration situation in terms of how we're watching college football, and the idea that it's a lot more parity driven across all of these top conferences than people would like to give it credit for. Anyway, let's move forward. Let's talk Big Ten, as most of the top teams took care of business. Ohio State 48-10 over a UCLA team that was missing their starting quarterback. Maybe a little bit of injury issue as Ohio State was missing their top 2 receivers. I think it was with injuries, but it didn't really matter in this game. Julian Sayin, he threw for 184 yards and a touchdown. Good for him. Indiana, a little bit of a slow start against Wisconsin, but they win 31-7. They really rolled them in the second half. Fernando Mendoza, 299 yards and 4 touchdowns. And, Wisconsin, as we've seen, can muck up offenses. They beat Washington last week. They held Oregon to 21 points in Autzen 2 weeks ago. Indiana beats them by 24 points. Doesn't beat the spread. That's still a pretty good win for Indiana, all things considered.
Yeah, both those teams, I don't think I expected a close game, and certainly, Indiana, I've read somewhere the game finished in 2 hours and 40 minutes at the end of it. That's
amazing.
unbelievable.
It was amazing. It was in the parking lot for free.
So it was like a take care of business game, move on. And honestly, like for the Hoosiers, they have not had a bye in 6 weeks. So not that they only have one game left after this, but certainly as it's lining up for them, having more time off is going to help them as they're still trying to get healthy. Ohio State in the same boat, but Ohio State still has that one big game left at this point, even though they do have big noon next week against the Scarlet Knights of Rutgers coming into to Ohio Stadium. So anyway, the top two teams continue to take care of business. Indiana certainly in control of going to the Big Ten. Ohio State they are in control, but they have a harder path to get there.
They have to play Michigan, who almost took themselves out of contention in Chicago this weekend. 5 turnovers for Michigan, but they squeak it out on a last-second walk-off field goal at Wrigley Field. They knock off Northwestern 24-22. This Michigan team, I just don't even know what to make of them. They're like Iowa with better branding at this point. They're just, they don't look impressive on offense. They look very impressive on defense. They have all the big bodies. They can out-physical teams, but they're careless with the football. They struggle to score. When they play elite offenses like they did against USC or Oklahoma, which I wouldn't even call Oklahoma an elite offense, but they're just an offense that can match up with them physically. They've struggled. But again, as long as Michigan can get through Maryland this week, which doesn't seem like it's going to be that big of a challenge, they are still on a collision course with Ohio State at the end of the year. I have a hard time seeing this Michigan team beating Ohio State, but I said that last year. I know, but it just doesn't feel like this is going to work out. But we'll see, because the flip side is Ohio State hasn't been challenged all year. It's been Texas and then a little bit of that Illinois game. And this will be the first true mano-a-mano physical battle that Ohio State will have gotten into really since the Texas game season. Yeah.
It's almost like Ohio State needs it. That's where it's a little different. We thought Ohio State was going to be in regardless last year, even if they lost the Michigan game, even though that was a very bad, they were 7-5 Michigan. It was not a good team. And not that, they're 8-2 this year, but I feel the same about them this year as I did last year. They're offensively just in a muck. Underwood hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in, I think, a month at this point. But for Ohio State, if we're looking for them, they need a ramp-up opponent because they're going to play likely Indiana. If they win, they'll play Indiana the following week. But it's also to know if Ohio State loses that game, they lose every three-way tiebreaker that comes into play. So Ohio State will not play in that game if they lose. Not that they want to lose the game. I'm just saying they're not going to lose the game to lose the game, right? But certainly there is some for them. It might work out if they happen to lose.
One of the teams that could still make the Big Ten championship game if Ohio State loses is USC, who came from behind to knock off Iowa in LA 26-21. Impressive win for USC in the rain against a team that plays really well in the rain. They shut out Iowa in the second half. Jordan Mailata, 254 yards and a touchdown. And Mekhi Lemon had an incredible game, 10 catches, 153 yards in this one. USC, they've got a huge matchup with Oregon in Autzen Stadium. The winner of that game is still very much alive for the Big Ten championship game. It would be a slightly easier pathway, I think, for Oregon in terms of the tiebreakers, but USC has the tiebreaker over Michigan. And so, either of those teams, I think, has gotten themselves to this point. But I think of the two, USC, which we'll talk about in the preview, USC needs that next win more, but we'll talk about that at the end of the show. But big win for them, and Iowa again coming up just short against one of the top teams in the conference.
Iowa's not going to get any credit at all. They're 6-4 now, 4-3 in the conference, but their 4 losses are a 3-point game at Iowa State, 5 at home against Indiana, 2 at home against Oregon, now 5 on the road against USC. They've been right there all season. They've been tough for everybody, and they beat Penn State, they beat Minnesota, they blow out Wisconsin. So they have been really, really good, but they're going to finish 8-4, and they're going to have that record. They weren't having a good season. They've been competitive. All of these teams into the fourth had leads against Oregon, USC, Indiana into the fourth quarter. So I'm glad that they're not going to be around and or no one's going to worry about them anymore, because they would have been a problem if they flipped some of these games.
Let's move over to the Big 12. Texas Tech taking care of business against UCF 48-9 in this game. I'll give the same caveat for Texas Tech that I gave for Georgia, which is I don't think that UCF is very good at all. But I give Texas Tech credit for winning by that margin. They just continue to do what they need to do. It was a really interesting game from a statistical standpoint because Texas Tech won this game and didn't really have any individual outstanding statistical contributors. They had no 100-yard rushers. They didn't even have an 80-yard rusher in this game, but they rushed for 205 yards. They didn't have 150 yards passing from any one guy, but they had two guys who had more than 140 yards passing in the same game. I don't know that I've ever seen a profile quite like that in a football game before. But Texas Tech, 10-1, 7-1, tied for 6th in the AP poll right now. They look like they are in really good shape heading into what will likely be the Big 12 title game. They've got one game remaining in the regular season schedule, and it's at West Virginia, which shouldn't be much of a challenge for them. They've done pretty much everything that's been asked of them so far this season.
Yeah, they only lost that Arizona State with the backup quarterback, so they have blown out everybody else. Everybody else this season so far. They've dominated. Everyone's talked about their roster being bought. They're within the trenches. It's worked out. I mean, they're 9-1. They're 10-1. They're likely going to be 11-1. They're probably that's the scenario for the Big 12 to get two teams in, right? Potentially, maybe we'll see how it works out. But yeah, they get a bye, much needed bye for them as well as they continue to roll through their schedule. I'm really curious. I guess they'll probably have a pretty good idea of where everything stands because everyone still has 2 games left outside of them in the conference, at least in the top half. But Cincinnati losing, and we'll probably talk about that here in a second. But they're likely out now. And Arizona State's hanging around, but they need a lot to go their way. So it seems like Texas Tech versus BYU at this point in a rematch.
Yeah, I mean, BYU did what they needed to do. They knock off TCU 44-13. They've still got to go to Cincinnati, who is now unranked after losing at home to Arizona. Cincinnati's one of those teams that can win any game and lose any game, it feels like, and they lost that one. But BYU taking care of business. I would be a little nervous if I was BYU, though, going into Cincinnati because they have zero margin for error as they move forward. They did lose to Texas Tech, but they did beat Utah, who's the other team that feels like they're in primary contention. Although Utah's got a little bit of a bigger mountain to climb because they've lost 2 games in conference because they also lost to BYU as well as Texas Tech. So it's a confusing situation in that conference in terms of who's actually in line. You look at the standings right now, and as you mentioned, like you've got a glut of teams at 5-2, Utah, Houston, Arizona State, and Cincinnati. Houston's a little bit intriguing. Obviously, they just entered the poll at the tail end. They're 25th in the most recent AP poll, and they've got 1 game left this season, or 2 games left. Sorry, they play TCU, and then they play at Baylor. Both of those are winnable games, but a lot of permutations as far as who ends up in the Big 12 title game. It does feel like whoever else is there is going to be playing Texas Tech, though.
Yeah, I not that I want to pencil Texas Tech in because West Virginia's played some really great games at home this year. So there is that. But I would like to see Texas Tech get there just to see how they match up with BYU again. Or if Utah somehow got there, it just seems I don't know the path with them losing to both those teams, and probably need a lot of scenarios, whatever is going to play out for them to get in there. But Utah's been really, really good outside of those 2 games that they lost.
ACC and ACC adjacent, Notre Dame 37-15 over Pitt. This went about like we expected that it probably would. Notre Dame, again, looks really good against a decent team. We'll see how that translates, but much like Ohio State, much like Texas A&M, they've won against not the best competition, but also not the worst as well. Miami, big win as they knock off North Carolina State. They had to have that. They're still on the outside looking in terms of the ACC title game, and it feels like they're really going to need to get to the ACC title game to have a shot at getting into the playoff. But who knows at this point? They've still got a little bit of a tough road to go as well, but they have at least kept themselves afloat. And it's just interesting because they're so far away from Notre Dame, the team they beat earlier in the year in the college football playoff rankings. And I wonder if the committee would revisit that at some point, given that they seem to like the eye test, and Miami certainly passed the eye test in this game.
Yeah, they were impressive. I think it was 41-0 at one point. I think they scored late, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we're down to 4 teams with 1 loss in the conference. We're going to have at least 3. Virginia or Pittsburgh plays Georgia Tech this week. Is that right? So we'll lose one of those teams, and then we'll be down to 3 1-loss teams, and then a bunch of 2-loss teams after that. It will be interesting to see how this shakes out. SMU, has been on the precipice all year, or not all year, but the last couple of weeks. And now they have played a Louisville team who just lost as we were texting back and forth, one of the worst 2 minutes I've watched all year of time management. But, you would think Louisville's going to be up for that game to potentially knock out SMU. So maybe things will work itself out. But it does seem like Virginia and Georgia Tech are probably the two prime candidates to get to Charlotte for this championship game. And like you said, Miami, it'll be interesting to see where Notre Dame lands in the poll and in the football or in the CFP this Tuesday, because if that gap continues to get minimized, if it's 2 or 3 teams if it gets to one team, then you have to consider the head-to-head at that point. You would think, right? I mean, I think that's where we're at. I know we'll talk about this here in a second, but that's going to come into play, I would think.
I mean, you would think. I don't know why it wouldn't at this point.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it's a complicated question for a couple of reasons we'll talk about when we get to the merit poll. We'll dive in that a little bit. A couple other games real quick. Georgia Tech had to score 19 points in the fourth quarter to beat 1-9, now 1-10 Boston College. I don't know if they've just run out of gas this season or what, but this is 2 weeks in a row that Georgia Tech has not looked like themselves. And meanwhile, Virginia, nice comeback. They end up beating Duke 34-17, which should knock Duke out of the scenario where they could get to the ACC title game. And Virginia's still in pretty good shape, 9-2 and 6-1 on the season now.
Yeah, I think that ends Duke, but I haven't ran through all the scenarios now because there's a couple 2-loss teams in there, and if Duke somehow got there 6-2 and 7-5, would be quite the story. But yeah, Virginia looks to be in good shape. They have a bye this week as well, and they play Virginia Tech, rivalry game for sure. But it is at Virginia. It's probably one of the better stories of the year if they do get to Charlotte. Having a chance to play for a playoff spot would be great for a team that's really has not a winning season in a couple of years, and for Elliott as well, the coach who was probably in the press was getting fired. Now he's rolling at 10-2 or 9-2 here with the Cavaliers.
We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with the merit poll, and we'll preview next week's action. We'll also talk about a couple of coaching non-changes that probably need to be discussed. So all that right after this break. You're watching Football Weather on the Back Home Network.
Hoosier Nation, want a smarter take on IU sports? Then check out Crimson Cast, your go-to podcast for Indiana football, basketball, and beyond. Hosts Galen Clavio and Scott Caulfield bring you game previews, instant reactions, history, and context to make Indiana sports come alive. From the biggest moments on the field to the storylines shaping the future, Crimson Cast keeps you informed and connected. And after years of saying bring back the Bison, IU actually did it. So if IU listens to Crimson Cast, maybe you should too. Just search Crimson Cast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube.
Welcome back, and let's go ahead and dive right into the merit poll for Week 12 of the college football season. And we can see we're mostly in alignment. We had top 3 was the same: Indiana, followed by Ohio State, followed by Georgia. I do want to note, folks, before I proceed, this is not how I think the committee is going to do things,
right,
but this is how I would rank them if it was me. So Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas A&M for Matt in 4th, followed by Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Oregon, running through the top 8. For me, I moved Texas Tech up to number 4, followed by A&M, followed by Oregon, followed by Ole Miss, followed by Oklahoma. We have some unanimity after that: Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, and Utah, 9 through 12. And then you've got Vandy, followed by Miami, followed by USC, followed by Georgia Tech, followed by Michigan. I've got Miami, followed by USC, followed by Texas, followed by Vanderbilt, followed by Michigan, Georgia Tech all the way down to 19th for me. So pretty similar. And, it's interesting when you look at the AP poll, I think the couple of things that stuck out to me in that, and then relating it to what we're doing in the merit poll, like things are starting to converge. They kind of have to at this point because you can't just keep throwing your preseason biases in. I do think it's interesting that, you've got Ole Miss 5th. I've got them 7th. I'm a little concerned about the overall mojo around Ole Miss at this point. And I'm also just I'm a little perplexed as to whether, going back to is the SEC actually good thing? Are we sure they're actually that good at this point? They did beat Oklahoma, and I think they get credit for that. They lost at Georgia. I don't think there's any shame there. They just don't have a lot of other wins on the resume. Whereas I look at Texas Tech and they've beaten, I think a pretty decent slate of teams over the course of their season. They've got to win against Utah on the road. They've got to win against Houston on the road. They beat BYU handily at home. I don't know. I mean, I'm starting to wonder about the individual resumes, and especially when you compare them to the power rankings. What should we put the most faith in at this point is where I keep going back and forth on things.
Yeah, what was interesting to me when I saw you after I did mine, I looked at yours, and then we both had Georgia at 3. I think we both it's not you take one result into account, but they have certainly played the better SEC schedule, and they, if we're being fair, they've been better than Texas A&M. I mean, they were the last couple of weeks too. So,
well, yeah, my thing with them is essentially they're 4th in FPI, and I do think, I mean, you guys know I very much think that the power ratings matter. They're 6th in S&P Plus, so I have them right there, and I just think that when you take the totality of how what they've accomplished over the course of the season, I like the fact that they've got now a win against a ranked Texas team, a win against Ole Miss. The thing about them that I find fascinating is outside of the Tennessee game, which was probably closer than it should have been in retrospect, all their best stuff's happened at home. And I do wonder how they would play on a neutral field. Whereas I look at Texas Tech, and this is almost making me rethink whether I should have put Texas Tech 3rd. Texas Tech has done things on the road.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the relative strengths of those teams, but I do think it's worth keeping in mind because even in the power rankings, the thing about Georgia that I find fascinating, they're 6th in S&P Plus, but Texas Tech is 3rd. And in FPI, Georgia is 4th. But if you look at the efficiencies, they have the 30th rated defense in the country right now, which is surprising. But so I wonder what to put the emphasis on with all of these teams. And to some degree, it feels like a bit of a dice roll at times.
It is curious because once you get past even Georgia, I don't know. If you look at Georgia, A&M, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Oregon, Bama, Notre Dame. Let's actually put Bama and Notre Dame in a different category. Those 5 I can see moving back and forth the next couple weeks here because they're gonna have these opportunities to win a game, lose a game. But there's also going to be this issue of SEC stacking. Who is the highest, after the SEC championship? Where are the next 3 going to land? How's Alabama going to play into this? And is Vanderbilt have any shot to move up in those areas as well? So we have the same top 10, which I think we both have those same 10 teams in the college football playoff as well for our rankings. And I'm curious how it's going to play out. As we see some head-to-heads, and certainly how Georgia is going to finish here with maybe no more SEC games left. They may only have Georgia Tech left at this point, and if that will hurt or help them.
Well, what I'm curious about with the committee, so the committee last week had A&M 3rd and Alabama 4th, and then Georgia 5th and Tech 6th. And Alabama was 4th in the AP poll last week. The AP poll dropped Alabama to 10th. So did the coaches poll.
Yep.
So 6-spot drop for losing to a team that was in the Oklahoma was 11th. Yeah. So I do wonder, is that what the committee will look at? Will they now look at this loss by Alabama and drop them that many spots? Because now you and I both have them at 9th. And where I am really fascinated is, does Alabama stay above Notre Dame? Or do they drop below Notre Dame? And I think there's arguments to be made both for and against that. I mean, the arguments against dropping Alabama or the arguments against keeping Notre Dame ahead of Alabama are Alabama's just got better wins. Like they actually have wins. They went into Georgia and beat Georgia. They beat Vanderbilt. You look at they won versus Tennessee. They won at Mizzou. They only lost by 2 points to Oklahoma. The flip side is Alabama lost to Florida State, and Notre Dame doesn't have a loss that bad on their resume. And when you look at FPI, Notre Dame is 5th in FPI and Alabama is 10th. So that's an internal metric ESPN is looking at. I'm sorry, that was efficiencies. My apologies. Notre Dame's 5th, Alabama's 6th in the actual FPI rankings. What weight does that carry with the committee? And when you look at S&P Plus, Notre Dame is 5th. That's what I was looking at. Notre Dame's 5th, Alabama's 11th in S&P Plus. So I do think that there's some question there. I don't think Alabama drops any lower than 10th, but if they're 9th instead of 10th, that creates some problems for Notre Dame, because there's a chance Alabama doesn't lose, and Notre Dame is now stuck still in that spot where they're, now Oklahoma's gone ahead of them. And even though Notre Dame would have won, they would have dropped a spot in the CFP rankings. It's an interesting little thing to think about.
And so I don't know, maybe we can transition here at the same time. So our top 6 for the college football playoff were the same: Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, A&M 3, Georgia 4, Tech 5, Ole Miss 6.
Yes.
I had Oklahoma 7, Oregon 8. You had Oregon 7, Oklahoma 8. I had Bama 9. You had Notre Dame 10. You had Notre Dame 10, 9, and Alabama 10. So we were really close to what we were thinking. But it does create this interesting, and we just talked about this, right? With Notre Dame, if they do drop to 10, which is essentially the last at-large spot at this point, with the 11 seed, probably the ACC champion, 12 the G5 spot, the G5 winner. The closer Miami gets, or Vanderbilt, if they can, Vanderbilt doesn't have much on the meat, but if they get to 10 wins, we also have USC sitting there. We have Michigan sitting there. All these teams that are on this list right now could all finish with 10 wins.
Yeah.
So is Notre Dame safe? And I heard this on a couple of podcasts. I don't know how Notre Dame's safe. They don't have – if Pitt loses this week, Pitt's going to be out of the top 25. I mean, they may already be out of there. They have USC as their only really big win. So maybe that helps them if USC does win this week and not Oregon, right? So that keeps them below them. But the Michigan thing still is a problem. And Miami's still a problem. I don't think Notre Dame is safe getting in at this point with what's remaining on their schedule. And they don't have the meat on the bone to really say, yeah, we have these wins. They only have these losses.
Yeah. Well, the thing Notre Dame's got going for it is the fact that, and again, we predicted this 2 months ago.
I know we did.
they're living Indiana's 2024 playoff campaign, where they're relying on strength of record, and they are relying on their overall quality of wins and power rankings to keep them up in position. And they're doing it with 2 losses as opposed to 1 loss. Yes, both losses were close, but realistically speaking, it is going to raise some questions down the way here, because I don't know, at what point do you have to say that's not enough to keep you ahead of these other teams that have good wins and also have a top 10 or a top 12 overall power rating. So I think it's, Notre Dame's 5th right now in FPI. They fell behind Georgia this week, but they basically just got replaced by Alabama. What I'm interested in now is when you look, I mean, I don't know how you ranked the teams that were just outside of the at-large field, but mine were BYU 11, Utah 12, USC 13, Vanderbilt 14, Miami 15, and then Michigan 16. That was basically my top 16. What did you have in that?
Yeah, I BYU, Utah, Vanderbilt, Miami, USC.
Yeah. So
yeah.
When I look at that, I mean, I try to game out, okay, what happens if any of those teams lose? Now, if USC, let's take BYU. BYU essentially has to roll through the rest of their schedule without a loss. And I don't even think that losing to Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game would be enough for BYU. I think they'd have to win that and get the auto bid. And Tech would be in good enough shape that they would make it as an at-large at that point. But if that occurred, would bump out Notre Dame. Utah's got a harder path, but again, it's the same path where they've got to run through, win the rest of their games, and that would bump BYU, but it would probably also bump, I'm guessing, Notre Dame. But this is where the question is: does it bump Notre Dame, or does it bump Alabama? USC's path I find fascinating, because USC, if they beat Oregon and Michigan beats Ohio State, USC finds themselves in the Big 12 title game, but they almost have to win that, because if they lose it, they'd be a 3-loss team. And yes, they'd have the win at Autzen, and yes, they'd have the win against Iowa, and they'd have a couple other games that were good on their resume.
Michigan,
and they'd have Michigan as well. Is that enough to get in as a 3-loss team? Is that a better resume just because they made their conference championship game than Alabama would have, or that Notre Dame would have with 1 less loss? And then Miami's the other one where I'm curious where Miami lands in this next ranking, because Miami in the last ranking for College Football Playoff Committee was 15th. And Miami, while they beat NC State handily, I don't think that was enough for them to leap any of the teams in front of them. They're not going to jump Vanderbilt or Utah or BYU. I think Texas could fall beneath them. They probably should, since Texas has got 3 losses now. So that would put them at 14th. They've still got a long way to go and no real good way to get there at this point, unless you get some chaos in front of them. And that becomes the last question mark to me. It's like, can Miami find a way to sneak in? Because I think that the committee would like to get them up there just from a style of play perspective and you looked really good at one point. I don't know if it's going to be enough for them.
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of Armageddon scenarios outside of like a BYU winning the conference title. Because the SEC seems like I don't see A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss at this point not making it. Oklahoma can still drop out, I would think, but I don't see those 3 teams not getting in, or not at least playing for the bye, or the loser losing the championship game and falling out. Same thing with Indiana, Ohio State. Those teams are not going to fall out of the poll. So you're looking at essentially 4 at-large spots at this point. We'll probably have a really good idea after the Oregon-USC game if Oregon is going to be one of those locks. If Oregon wins, you can probably almost pencil them in. I know they got to play Washington, so which will be a tough game. That would give them another big win. That would knock USC out. So, I mean, Notre Dame is rooting for these things, right? They're rooting for USC to lose. They're rooting for BYU to lose in the championship game. They're losing for Miami to lose another game potentially. Because the one thing they don't want to do is Miami gets, I said earlier, to get closer. Because once if they're one spot, you can't. There's no way you put Notre Dame ahead of Miami. And that's where it gets really interesting. I don't see a path for Miami to win the ACC unless there's that would be the Armageddon scenario. If they somehow got to the ACC championship game, that's the only one.
It took me a solid 5 minutes of screwing around with the thing, with the
it's great,
conference predictor, to actually find a scenario where Miami would be in the title game, and it requires like SMU losing twice, I think. It requires Pitt losing. There's a bunch of other things that have to happen in order to make it happen. I think it ends up being like Miami, Virginia, which isn't even a game that they may necessarily win. So it's just, I don't know. I find that, but again, for those of you, when you're watching, since now everybody once again will be able to watch the CFP show.
We're back.
We're back. That's the big ones I would watch ranking wise is, first of all, does Georgia go to 4th or do they go to 3rd? Because I think a lot of committee people will overreact to Georgia beating Texas that much, and they may also similarly overreact to Texas A&M. And look at the totality of their work and say, maybe not. But that whole cluster of teams from 3 through 10, what order do they go in, and can we derive anything from that? Where do they put Texas Tech? Where do they put Ole Miss? Where do they put Oregon? And then what happens? Where does Alabama end up landing in the eyes of the committee? This is the 2 sacred cows, Notre Dame and Alabama, going head to head. And there's going to be real decisive things potentially coming out of who ends up 9th and who ends up 10th, assuming that's the order they end up in.
For the last 3 weeks since they started, or maybe even longer, for the last weeks of the college football playoff rankings, Florida State loss did not happen. It has to matter now. I'm sorry, but it has to. That team is 4-6, has been a dead man walking for a month and a half. You can't just act like that didn't happen. It happened, and this is where
they're 5-5 now. They're not 4-6. Yeah,
sorry, 5-5. So maybe if they finish 7-5, it helps a little bit. But still, I mean, they should not be a mid-table ACC team. Yeah. But the point is, they lost that game. It has to matter when you're looking at Notre Dame versus Alabama. Notre Dame's going to lose. Their 2 losses are Texas A&M and Miami, right? Yeah. By 4 total points. Alabama got run off the field against Florida State. The team who lost.
They lost by 14 in that game.
Yeah, and it was never close. It was never close.
Right.
And so this is where the SEC needs to calm down a little bit and about beating their chest. That game happened, and we all saw it. Yeah. So you're right. That's the most interesting one, where Miami is, because and for people who are not understanding the actual playoff, Miami's not the ACC bid. It's not going to be them.
They will get listed again by the committee because they'll be the highest ranked ACC team, but they don't have a path to get to the ACC title game. It will be, I think I had Georgia Tech, who feels like still the most likely.
I took Virginia, but either way, it's one of those two teams. Probably.
Georgia Tech, it's Virginia, it's SMU. I mean, that's the teams that are in the mix right now, not Miami.
Right.
So,
and I guess I guess you have to do that for the playoff, for the actual poll, for the rankings. But I think they all should say it's not Miami. It's going to be pick the other team, right? It's not that team right now. And that's where they need to talk about that a little more on the show, which we couldn't watch last week, but certainly we can watch this week.
Or you can just watch us because we're going to go live again during that game. So be sure to tune in to us like 8:30.
8:30, yeah.
Is it 8:30 on Tuesday? We'll be alive once again to talk about that. We're saving the preview of I wanted to say real quick, I don't know if you saw the news, Maryland announced that Mike Locksley will be returning next year as their head coach. They're going to commit significant funds to NIL, which has become the new vote of confidence. I don't know if you noticed this.
This is our new segment, Vote of Confidence Week.
That's right. But one of those things where clearly Maryland had neither the money nor the appetite to go through a coaching search. It would not be a highly sought after job. And look, I think there's a lot of open questions about Mike Locksley's ability to win regularly at Maryland. I also think there's a lot of open questions about the ability to win regularly at Maryland, regardless of who your coach is. So I do think it's interesting because we saw this at Wisconsin as well. And I think both of those schools are in a position where they need to demonstrate that they can compete in this era. And what's the point in going and getting a new coach if you haven't already demonstrated that you're going to be able to marshal the financial resources to make a go of it? And there's a lot that you have to do there. It's going to take more than one offseason to fix both of those programs. So why pay somebody not to coach and pay somebody to coach while you're getting those things put into place?
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, where do you rank Maryland? The Big Ten jobs, 3 with Purdue and Rutgers.
Yeah. I mean, Rutgers and Maryland go back and forth over who makes the least amount of money every year on athletics. Yeah. And Purdue, we could have a whole show where we talk about nothing but Purdue's NIL issues. It's really wild. I mean, Northwestern's a better job right now than any of those 3 just because of the financial resources they have at their disposal. And I don't know how they dig out of it. I mean, it is a really tough spot for schools that don't have a readily available reservoir of money. And when you add in that Maryland was already having major financial issues, that's why they came to the Big Ten in the first place.
Right.
It's a dark kind of timeline for those programs right now. And you're, much like we've seen and much like I think the calculus is happening at Florida State and a couple other places, even though Florida State is on paper a very attractive job, like there's a possibility that the next coaching carousel could be this rough, but this one feels especially rough, even with LSU determined to shoot themselves in the foot at every possible opportunity.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. The lawsuit that was amazing to read. It was incredible. Yeah. But just focusing, and I do wonder if Franklin was reached out to, since he knows the DMV really well. But it sounds like he's going to Virginia Tech at this point. It seems pretty certain. I mean, every corner you read, he's the target, and there's waiting for him to say yes or no. But which is, I think, a good landing spot. Not that we're going down that, but it seems like a good landing spot for him. He knows the area. He's got these recruited there. It seems like it would be a really good hire for him. Probably staying out of the Big Ten or the SEC. It makes sense. Yeah. But for Maryland, you're right. I mean, the vote of confidence is the new thing, and I just don't think you want to be in this cycle if you're even a middle or lower tier team in any of the Big Two or the Big Four at this point, because you're just going to be getting, I don't know. I mean, you're going the Sun Belt route, which again, you could get lucky, and everyone's looking for their Kurt Cignetti, but the chances are you're not getting someone ready for that job.
Yeah, it's look, there's a lot of arguments for firing your coach early, and we've talked about many of them on this show. But if you have no better options at this stage, you'd be better off getting your financial house in order around it, rather than trying to make all of that happen. Again, it's one of the underreported things about the Cignetti hire at Indiana, which was Indiana hired him and then simultaneously poured a ton of money into the program that they hadn't poured before. And that led to everything that's happened over the last 2 years at IU. it's not something that most schools are actually ready to do or in a position to do. You've got to take it in stages, and that's, I think, where Maryland finds themselves at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but they're just, I mean, it's been the same thing with them too. Like they get up to a hot start and then they just fade. And it sounds like, I don't follow Maryland football enough, but maybe have a little more insight, but they have been recruiting decently. So is it the recruiting, or is it Loxley and this not getting the job done? I don't know.
That's the thing. It's probably Loxley, because they've got talent. They're just not really converting the talent into regular play. And as you mentioned, they struggle down the stretch. Yeah, I don't know. It's again, the much deeper systematic issues there. We'll see how they're able to address it, if they're able to address it at all, because they're one loss away from not being bowl eligible again, and that's
hard to believe.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Yes.
Anyway, not a ton of big games this weekend. This is
SEC bye week.
This is SEC FCS week, which happens every year. There are a couple of teams engaged in some interesting games. You mentioned one earlier, big noon from Columbus, Ohio State hosting Rutgers. I don't anticipate it's going to be a game. It's a 33.5-point spread. I mean, Rutgers is not completely dead, but they have struggled in a way that it was very reminiscent of what they did last year as well. Ohio State's likely to cruise in this one and probably should play some backups just so they can get a little bit of rest before Michigan next week.
You would think they're going to sit some guys for this one just to get, you're right, to get ready. I'm surprised this is big news, but I guess they probably didn't have a lot of other options. For this week looks pretty brutal. But yeah, I mean, Ohio State, you expect this to be a 20, 25-point game. But something to look at for Rutgers, if they lose, they'll be 5-6, potentially playing 5-6 Penn State for a chance to go bowling. Who had that on their bingo card to start the season?
That is a good stat, Blaszka. I love that. Oklahoma hosting Mizzou. Mizzou probably is not going to compete in this one. Mizzou's 7-3, but they do not have the offense at this point. But they deserve credit. They take down Mississippi State at home. Oklahoma will almost certainly have a hangover after winning at Alabama, but they cannot afford to lose this game. They can't even really afford to look average or poor in this game. They need to demonstrate that was the beginning of something in Tuscaloosa. That's a noon kick. That should be a pretty good game, though. I'm interested to see how that one goes.
Yeah, it's one of those you need to get up for it regularly, like you said, to show the committee that you are this team. Go out and beat Missouri by 15 points. I mean, it hasn't happened much in the SEC this year, but certainly show that you're ready to go to the playoff at this point.
Louisville at SMU. You talked about this one earlier a little bit. SMU 5-1 in conference. They can go to 8-3 overall if they win this game. They're a 3.5-point favorite. I don't know how Louisville recovers from what's happened for them the last couple of weeks. I mean, talk about a promising season nosediving. And when you got Miller Moss, who transferred from USC, talking about culture issues in the post-game press conference because of all the penalties, that's generally a bad sign.
Yeah, I had to double check that Petrino wasn't still the coach there.
Yeah.
It's not Petrino, but yeah, man. I mean, that was an explosive press conference. Just the way, I mean, they've had some really rough losses. They lost to Virginia in double overtime on 2 defensive touchdowns, and lost this one. It's just, I'll be curious how they get off the mat. And SMU needs this, right? But this is SMU's season right here to keep it going and a chance to get back to the title game.
Arguably the game of the day, Oregon hosting USC, 3:30 kick Eastern time on CBS. Oregon, a 9.5-point favorite in this game, which is a bit of a surprise because these are two pretty even teams, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been increasingly impressed as much as we've seen USC and particularly Lincoln Riley getting crushed in the media. I've been impressed with what they've done. They come back and they win against Nebraska. They come back and they win against Iowa. They've got the win against Michigan. You look at their schedule, they have a 10-point loss at Notre Dame and a 2-point loss on a last-second field goal at Illinois in a game that they had driven down the field and looked like they might have won in the last 2 minutes. I mean, they've got some good stuff on their resume. They've got to win this game, though. I mean, otherwise it is essentially whatever the equivalent of a Citrus Bowl season is for a Pac-12 or former Pac-12 team.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I was surprised by the spread, too. And these two teams seem very close. I was really impressed with Oregon after winning that game in Iowa, winning on Friday night pretty handily against, I know they're a mediocre Minnesota team, but to really take it to them after that one is was what was really good to see, because they really struggled against Wisconsin, and they had to play in the rain against Iowa again. So it'll be interesting to see how they get up for another big game. They're hosting game day again. They're for the second time this year, and they lost the first one. So hopefully this is really a big game for Oregon. They don't have a lot of meat on the bone. They can't afford to lose this game, or they could be a 10-2 Big Ten team that does not make the playoff.
Yeah, that is the little secret with Oregon. It's not much of a secret, I guess, if you've been paying attention, but they have no ranked wins. And the game that they poured their heart and soul into to win was against Penn State. And, of course, they won that in overtime, and that win looks pretty undistinguished at this point. That win, ironically, is maybe less impressive than winning 56-10 at Rutgers, which they did 2 weeks later.
Right.
Who would have predicted that?
Right.
But no, they winning at Iowa is probably the most impressive win they've got on their schedule, and Iowa keeps hovering around being ranked. But when you're 6-4, you're probably not going to stay ranked, and so they need this win. It should lay out for them. They certainly have the talent to beat USC, but I am fascinated to see what happens. And then, of course, they got to go to Washington the last week of the season, so they've got two big hurdles here that will tell us, I think, for sure whether they're getting in. But they really can't afford to lose either of them, I think, at this point.
Yeah, they're probably the one team. I know they're ranked 8th, but the one team in the top 8 that's probably in the shakiest ground based on just what they have left.
And they're also, in the spirit of talking about how we consider these teams, they're so hard to figure because their power rankings are so high. They're 4th in S&P Plus. They're 3rd, I believe, in FPI. Like the numbers love Oregon, and
they support them. Yeah.
And so that's where we've had to kind of figure out what side of the divide we sit on. The thing is, the numbers really love USC too. This should be a really good football game. I'm looking forward to it. Only other games worth noting, one to keep an eye on: Kentucky at Vanderbilt. Kentucky has looked pretty decent here lately. They're 5-5. Vanderbilt's 8-2. Vanderbilt's a 10.5-point favorite in this game. I'd probably still take Vanderbilt to win. I don't know if I would take them to cover at this point, as Kentucky seems to have found some things with their offense and is just generally playing a better brand of football. And, it's like it's your dangerous ground when you're picking against Kentucky. But keep in mind, they almost beat Texas. They only lost to Texas 16-13 earlier this year. They only lost to Ole Miss by 5. They've been in some games against some teams that we have considered to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's a big game for Vandy coming off a bye, like you said. And we didn't even talk about Vanderbilt at all. Really, we just said, they're I think 3 or 4 down the rung. But I mean, they're going to need help to get in, despite being probably a 10-2, potentially 10-2 SEC team. So whatever Vandy needs to do, they probably need to blow Kentucky out to really show the committee something, because they're in some danger of not making the playoff because they just don't have the wins and they have 2 losses.
2 more games for you, evening games. Pittsburgh at Georgia Tech. That's a 7 p.m. kick. Georgia Tech a 2.5-point favorite in this game. Is the dream dead for Tech, or do they have something left in the tank? Pitt clearly was like, we're not going to worry too much about that Notre Dame game because they want to go to the ACC title game. And neither of these teams can afford a loss at this point in the ACC.
Yeah, it's interesting. The coach for Pittsburgh said, I don't care if we lose by 100. It doesn't matter. Okay, you're not wrong. But, I mean, now you got to get back up and play Georgia Tech, who you said they looked really bad on Sunday or Saturday. So it's only 2.5 points, like you said. And so this should be a good game. The winner stays in the mix. Loser is out.
Yeah. Last game, 8 p.m., Fox night game, BYU at Cincinnati. My antenna are way up on this game, Matt. BYU a 2.5-point favorite on the road, which is pretty low when you consider that Cincinnati's got 2 more losses and looked putrid in that game against Arizona down the stretch offensively. I don't know, man. I just get the feeling Cincinnati might pull one out here and take BYU out of the picture. It would clear a lot of things up, certainly, as we go down the stretch. But we'll see. I don't know. BYU has proven that they are a good team, but they've struggled at the end of seasons. We'll see what they do here.
It was crazy that they lost this game at home to Arizona, because they have been really good at home all year. They blow up Baylor, the UCF, beat Iowa State. So to lose like they did and basically knock themselves out was a little surprising. And both of us, I think, had them ranked 2 weeks ago when they were rolling. They were 7-1, won 7 in a row. Looked really good. You're right. This game is it's a tough one. BYU going east, and then an 8 o'clock kick. It's late. this is Cincinnati's last stand. I guess they would probably still be in the mix if they won this. I don't know that we have to really go through tiebreakers at that point, but this will be one of the better games of the day because it is a really, really light slate. So I'm hoping this one's featured. It's on Fox as well, so it should be a good game.
Yeah. Any other games from the week? Or I couldn't find any that really mattered. I mean, there's some that might matter, but it would require the better team playing significantly worse than a team that's bad, like Michigan going to Maryland or something like that.
Yeah, I don't really see anything like that. I mean, Michigan needs to win, but we know that to set up next week. Yeah, I don't see anything. I mean, Texas, how do they get off the mat? This is a really bad week. So I think SEC, Big Ten, or whomever, let's make sure we're scheduling better than this week before next year, so we don't have this. This is a really, really tough week to pull together.
Yeah. So, but it does lead us into rivalry week, which is the following week, and that's always a lot of fun. And it's also Thanksgiving week, so that's even more fun. And we'll find out who's going to be in the conference championship games and all of that. But anyway. Matt, as always, a pleasure. As we are going to wrap up another week of football weather, we will have a special live football weather coming up this Tuesday night at 8:30 or thereabouts as we recap what happened in the CFP playoff selection show, or at least the committee update, whatever, and talk about what we saw there. And then obviously we'll be back next Sunday or Monday, depending on when you're listening to this, as we wrap up what occurred in the week of college football, look at some coaching vacancies perhaps, or maybe even some potentially filled vacancies at that point, and talk about what's going to be going on during rivalry week. Matt, as always, a pleasure. Enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
See you Tuesday.
All right. Catch all you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.